Hey guys, today's video is going to be a single action only Autoloaders Explained. I wanted to build off the knowledge that we previously had off the striker fired video and kind of increase your knowledge to know what's out there, different type of firing type mechanisms. Now in terms of autoloaders, there's really four big categories. The striker fired video that we've talked about before, SAO or single action only I'm going to talk about today, and in the future, we'll go through SADA, which is single action and double action, and then DAO, which is double action only. Now, the good news is that once you understand the basics of one or two of these mechanisms, you really are going to understand all of them. It's very cumulative. They build off each other. Outside of something completely different, there really shouldn't be any surprises. Yeah. So the only two guns that I have in terms of single action only, it is a Browning 1911 22. This is supposed to be a scaled down version of the famous John Moses Browning 1911, which is in 45 ACP. But I think this is 70% of the regular gun, so it's a little smaller. Browning released this in 2011 as kind of an anniversary celebration, of course, of the 1911, right? 2011. And the other gun I have is a Mob P15. This gun was supposed to be adopted by the French army when they were in Vietnam, but that never happened because Germany had pretty much invaded France. So these are the two guns that I have that are single action only. So in determining the mechanism for SAO, it's very similar to striker fire. That's the good news. When the slide retracts, it does three things. It's going to eject the case, put in a new round, but instead of where a striker fire is reset in the striker channel, this just pushes the hammer back. Okay, when the slide retracts, that's the only difference. The hammer is pushed back. Well, I'll even show you. So if it's, let's say you just fired the gun, right? And it wouldn't look like this, but pretend you just fired the gun. Okay, so now the recoil is coming back. Then what's it doing? The slide is pushing the hammer back. That's because I had a magazine in there. Anyhow, right? It's going to push the hammer back, and then it sets it up again. And again, you just pull the trigger, and it hits the round. The round goes off, pushes it back again and again and again and again until the gun is empty. And if it's empty, it will look like that. Okay, lets you know that the gun is empty. So that's it. That's the only difference. There's just an exposed hammer on the outside of the gun instead of a striker inside the striker channel of the slide. Now, even though that is the only difference mechanically, there's actually a specific way you have to train with this firearm, which is, in my opinion, a lot different than any others, and it has really, it doesn't have any ability to, it doesn't have any overlap. Like if you train a DAO, you're going to have overlap in SADA. You train SADA, you're going to have overlap in DAO. SAO is kind of its own thing. It's specifically its own thing, and it's kind of different enough that you almost have to specialize it, or at least have a unique time frame of specializing in that training. So with SAO, there is a clear safety on the gun. Now with striker fire, we talked about before, it can have a safety, it might not have a safety, but SAO will always have a safety. The reason why is because the trigger is very light. The trigger is like 3.5 pounds average. That's a pound less than the striker fired. And so with such a light trigger, people had decided that, hey, there needs to be a safety on the gun because the trigger pull is too light. If you're in battle, you're kind of, adrenaline's going, you're scared, you can be pressing on that trigger a little too hard and the gun can go off. So with the safety, right, the way that you're going to train with this, there's two methods. It's called condition 1, and I think there's a condition 2. But condition 1, the way you train with this at the range, if you want this to be your particular art, is you will chamber the gun, right? You'll put a round in it, and everything, right? And then you'll put the safety up, right? So you turn the safety on, and then you would holster the gun, right? And only when you were engaging a target or an enemy target, then you would come out, you would take the safety off, and then engage the target. And then when the threat is dealt with, you turn the safety back on, and then you reholster the gun. You have to do that every single time. Um, you know, there's really, I mean, there's condition two, but I think most militaries are going to agree that condition one is how you're going to want to train with the firearm. What's condition two? So condition two, what you're going to do is what some people will do here. Why doesn't the, oh, because the safety's on.
Stupid.
Okay, anyways, condition two, what you're going to do is that the safety's off and the hammer's down. So it's going to be holstered, and then when you approach an enemy target, and of course there's a round chambered, of course, right? So just make sure you chamber around, right? Okay, so after you chamber around, right, and you leave the safety off, you will touch the hammer. You're going to let it down slowly, okay? And you have to let it down slowly, because if you don't, then the gun's going to go off, right? You let it down slowly. Now the only thing is, if you're engaging an enemy target, you don't even deal with the safety. You just go up, you cock the hammer back, and then you approach the target. And then you deal with the target, and then, I mean, I think you should just go to condition one, but I guess some people can just, you know, um, go back to condition two. But again, you really have to practice that guiding that hammer down, because if it goes down too hard, it's gonna set the gun off, right? But that's the two training methods you have, is condition one and condition two. So it's single action only, and you're going to see this with SADA and DAO. It does one single action, right? It just does one thing. And what that means is that when you pull the trigger, it just does one thing, and it just lets the hammer fall. That's it. When we talk about SADA or DAO, you're going to see the hammer do two things, okay? It's going to actually cock the hammer and then release the hammer, which of course results in a heavy trigger pull, okay? Um, Now, another thing about SAO is you also have the ability to do second strike. Now, this, in my opinion, is not a big deal. If you're in some kind of combative situation, most people are just going to tap rack bang, which means that when you go to approach the target and it get a click, nothing happens. Maybe the round's bad. Most people are just going to tap rack and then shoot again, right? But just for the range or just for fun, what second strike is, let's say you go to the range and you had a bad round, so you go to the range, you pull the trigger, and then the gun doesn't go off, right? It didn't hit the primer hard enough. You can, right, essentially recock the hammer and pull the trigger again. Okay, now you can't do that with striker fired, remember, because striker fired doesn't reset unless you pull the slide back. Okay, now whether you consider that a positive or a negative, in my opinion, I don't think it matters. I don't think most people will do that. In a combat situation, why would you give a second chance to a round that didn't work the first time? You know, you're just going to go to the next round and have better luck there. But that's just something offshoot. You can technically do second strike, and you can't really do that with a striker fired pistol. Now, I forgot to mention this before, but for most striker fires, if they have a manual safety, I prefer they don't. They have another safety, which is it's that little plastic tab in the middle of the gun, and all that does is that if that's not pushed back, the trigger can't be pressed. That is a passive safety that most striker fires are using. Glock, of course, is the first one that did it. Smith & Wesson M&P, I believe they actually pay percentage to Glock to use that design. And then I think my Ruger LCP has it. You know, any kind of striker fire, they use that passive safety. Now, in regards to an actual 1911, there is actually two types. It is a 70 series and an 80 series. And the difference between the two is that the 70 series has a lot less moving parts, and the 80 series has more moving parts. Now, you might ask, why would you want that? From a technical perspective, if there's moving parts, more can go wrong, and that is technically true. But I think it was possibly a legal decision, but also I think there was a case where there was an accidental discharge. Now, let me make it clear that an accidental discharge is not the same as a negligent discharge. A negligent discharge is when somebody doesn't know how their weapon works and the gun went off because they didn't know how it worked. But an accidental means circumstances outside of the norm, it actually went off by itself. Okay, this has happened before with, I believe, the SIG P320 and the Honor Guard. What had happened was that if the gun fell at a certain angle, the fact that it would bounce off the ground put enough pressure that it would pull the trigger and basically fire the gun. Now, I am not familiar with any stories about this for the 1911, but I guess it was a possibility. And that's why they changed from the 70 series to the 80 series. Paul Harrell talks about it in 1911s. I forget which video it is, but he kind of explained it well, where basically I think the 70 series could pull itself. The trigger could pull itself if the gun fell at a certain angle and it could fire, which of course was a problem. And I think Mr. Harrell doesn't even consider the 80 series like a bad or anything. I think that's actually his main martial art is the 1911 along with the Beretta 92. But that is something that, if you're going to get into 1911s, those are something you consider is a 70 series and an 80 series. Like I said, the difference is that people say, I don't know, that the 80 series has a heavier trigger or a bad trigger. The only Nintendo I have is the SIG P938, and I think that's an 80 series. But I know that Rock Island Armory prides itself on the 70 series 1911. Again, the difference is that I think there's a piece in the 80 series that it will not allow the fire pin to go through unless you pull the trigger. So technically, it's just more safe. So the training protocol for the 1911 is, as I said, it's very distinct. It's not really going to apply to other martial arts, but it's pretty clear, it's pretty simple, and if you practice it for hours, you'll probably become pretty proficient with it. So as I mentioned, the way you train, you go to the range, you'll load it up, you'll rack the slide, then you put the safety on. And then when you're ready to engage your target, you'll take the safety off. And then when you're dealt with the target, you'll put the safety on and reholster. And then you take it out and you put the safety off. And then you engage a target and you put safety on. I would just do that after every shot, every shot, every shot, every shot. And then, of course, once you get used to that, you would do every 2 shots, every 3 shots, every 4 shots. Just kind of train yourself that when the gun is presented, the safety must turn off. And then when the enemy is dealt with, then the safety must come on and you reholster. So it's very straightforward, very clear, not too difficult to deal with. It's just it's a lot of thinking if you're not familiar with it. My first martial art was single action revolver, but then I went to double action revolver, and now I went to SAO Autoloader. So clearly the SAO Autoloader is way out of my line. So of course it seems difficult to me, but if you trained with it since you were a kid, obviously this wouldn't be a problem for you. And lots of people still depend on the 1911. It may be a really old design, but it's dependable and people still use it to this day. I hope I didn't make this video too difficult to understand. It may have been a little bit all over the place, but like I said, the only difference is that there's just an exposed hammer, and you have to deal with the safety and train with that. But those are really the only 2 major differences. Other than that, it's very similar to a striker fired. Next time, we'll talk about SADA, and then after that, DAO. So, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope it helped you out. If you have questions, comments, leave it here, or message me on Instagram. Other than that, you guys take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.